Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a move that's reverberated across the nation, Congress and President Trump have enacted the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, eliminating the $200 federal tax on National Firearms Act, NFA, items like suppressors and short-barreled rifles. For millions of gun owners, this is a monumental victory, removing a financial barrier that's existed since the 1930s. Supporters hail it as a restoration of Second Amendment rights, while opponents warn it could threaten public safety. The bill's passage, after years of lobbying, marks the most significant rollback of federal gun regulations in decades. Critics cite incidents like the 2019 Virginia Beach shooting, arguing that making suppressors more accessible is a dangerous gamble. This law has drawn a stark new line in America's polarized gun debate. To truly grasp the impact of this change, we need to journey back nearly a century, to a time when America was grappling with a wave of violence and uncertainty. The National Firearms Act of 1934 was a direct response to the chaos of the Prohibition era, when notorious gangsters and organized crime syndicates wielded powerful weapons on city streets, fueling public fear and outrage. Rather than banning so-called gangster weapons like machine guns and sawed-off shotguns outright, lawmakers imposed a hefty $200 tax, an enormous sum at the time, equivalent to over $4,700 today. This tax was intentionally set high to discourage ownership, effectively putting these firearms out of reach for most Americans. The law also introduced strict new requirements. Owners had to register their weapons, submit fingerprints, and undergo a federal background check. This created one of the first national databases of regulated firearms, marking a major shift in how the government tracked and controlled certain guns. Over the decades, inflation gradually eroded the tax's power to deter, but for many, the cost and paperwork remained a significant barrier. The NFA's legacy became one of both financial and bureaucratic hurdles, shaping gun ownership for generations. Interestingly, items like suppressors, once vilified as tools for criminals, are now often promoted as safety devices, helping to protect shooters' hearing and reduce noise pollution at ranges. This shift reflects changing attitudes and new debates about what these devices represent. Supporters of the NFA argue that its requirements are essential for public safety, helping law enforcement keep dangerous weapons out of the wrong hands and providing accountability for gun owners. On the other hand, critics see the law as an outdated and unconstitutional barrier, arguing that it infringes on individual rights and fails to address modern realities. For nearly 90 years, the debate over the NFA's purpose and fairness has continued to spark passionate arguments. Today, as new legal challenges emerge, the very foundation of this historic law is being questioned once again. The repeal of NFA taxes was a masterclass in political strategy, unfolding over months of careful planning and behind-the-scenes negotiations. Lawmakers and their aides worked tirelessly, drafting language and building coalitions, all while keeping their true intentions closely guarded from the opposition. The movement was sparked by Rep. Andrew Clyde's determined push to deregulate suppressors, a cause he championed both in committee hearings and on the House floor. Clyde's efforts galvanized a coalition of like-minded legislators who saw an opportunity to reshape federal firearms law. Gun rights groups like the NRA and Gun Owners of America lobbied hard, broadening the bill to include other NFA items. Their influence was felt in countless meetings, phone calls, and public campaigns, as they rallied supporters and pressured lawmakers to expand the bill's scope. Realizing that full deregulation would never pass in the current political climate, the coalition pivoted to a more pragmatic approach, repealing the NFA taxes. They embedded this provision deep within a must-pass budget bill, a move designed to make it nearly impossible for opponents to strip it out without risking a government shutdown. This maneuver cleverly bypassed the threat of a Senate filibuster, ensuring the measure's survival even in the face of fierce resistance. The legislative chess game paid off, as the bill advanced through both chambers. The final bill, named in Trump's signature style as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, was attached to a sweeping omnibus package that included major tax cuts and significant changes to federal spending. The scale of the legislation made it a centerpiece of the congressional session. Passed along party lines after intense debate, the bill reached President Trump's desk and was signed into law on July 4, 2009. Andruai Kerman, Taubawain, Samaiv. A symbolic date chosen to highlight its significance for American freedoms. For gun rights advocates, it was a hard-fought triumph and a testament to their enduring influence in Washington. The celebrations that followed reflected years of advocacy, persistence, and political maneuvering. With the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the stage was set for a new era in firearms policy, one that would reshape the landscape for years to come. The new law repeals the $200 tax on suppressors and short-barreled rifles and similar items, effective January 1, 2026. However, all other NFA regulations remain. Buyers must still submit fingerprints and photos and undergo an extensive ATF background check. Federal registration is still required and every NFA item remains tied to its owner in a national database. Selling or transferring these items without proper ATF approval is still a felony. The only change is the removal of the financial barrier. The paperwork and waiting periods remain. Industry experts predict a surge in applications which could lengthen already long wait times. The NFA now functions as a pure registration and regulation system, not a tax and regulation scheme. This subtle shift is already being tested in the courts. Before the repeal, over 4.5 million suppressors were registered in the U.S., with demand rising despite the tax. The tax's removal is expected to trigger a massive surge in applications and sales. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates a $1.7 billion loss in federal revenue over the next decade. Meanwhile, the firearms industry anticipates explosive growth, with manufacturers and retailers preparing for a boom. Companies like Silencer Co. are poised for expansion, and new players are entering the market. The ATF faces a daunting administrative challenge, as application backlogs could worsen without more resources. Critics warn that the loss of revenue is fiscally irresponsible, while supporters tout job creation and economic stimulus. The true impact will depend on how the industry and government adapt to this new landscape. The response to the tax repeal has been swift and deeply divided. Gun rights groups celebrate it as a historic victory, but some hardliners argue it doesn't go far enough, demanding full deregulation. They see continued registration and background checks as ongoing infringements. Gun control advocates, meanwhile, condemn the law, citing tragedies like the Virginia Beach shooting and warning of increased risks to public safety. They argue that suppressors make it harder for law enforcement to respond to gunfire and could undermine gunshot detection systems. National gun safety organizations insist suppressors' primary function is to mask gunfire, not protect hearing. The debate has only intensified, with both sides vowing to continue the fight. The law's passage has become a new flashpoint in America's ongoing gun debate. The repeal is expected to boost the firearms industry, creating jobs and economic growth in manufacturing and retail. Supporters argue it will improve public health by encouraging suppressor use and reducing hearing damage. Critics, however, see it as part of a larger, fiscally reckless agenda that benefits the few at the expense of many. They fear a quieter gunshot could delay emergency responses and increase confusion during violent incidents. The change also shifts focus to state laws. Some states may further deregulate, while others could impose new restrictions or bans. This could create a patchwork of regulations, deepening political and cultural divides. The societal impact, whether safer shooting or greater risk, may krijger geen nanny por kinderstammer la frio wines. Try marndoars. The law's ripple effects will be felt far beyond the gun community. Experts remain deeply divided on what the recent tax repeal signals for the future of firearms policy in the United States. Some see it as a pivotal moment, while others warn of unpredictable consequences. The move has sparked intense debate across political, legal, and social spheres, with each side interpreting the implications through their own lens. Pro-gun analysts argue that the repeal reflects a significant shift in public attitudes. Suppressors, once stigmatized as tools for criminals, are increasingly viewed as legitimate safety devices that protect hearing and promote responsible gun ownership. Supporters believe this change is part of a broader movement to normalize firearms accessories and reduce unnecessary barriers for law-abiding citizens. They point to growing acceptance among recreational shooters and families who prioritize safety at the range. On the other hand, gun control advocates caution that removing the tax could have unintended and potentially dangerous consequences. They predict an increase in incidents where suppressors make it harder for law enforcement to detect and respond to gunfire, complicating investigations and potentially putting the public at greater risk. Critics argue that the move prioritizes industry interests over community safety. The legal landscape is also in flux. Gun rights organizations have already filed lawsuits, contending that, without the tax, the National Firearms Act's regulatory foundation is fundamentally weakened. These legal challenges could set important precedents, potentially reshaping how firearms and their accessories are regulated at the federal level. Legal scholars are split on the issue. Some believe the courts will uphold the remaining regulations, while others argue that the entire framework could be called into question. Despite their differences, most agree that the outcome of these cases could have far-reaching effects on federal firearms law and the balance of power between state and federal authorities. Over the next several years, the nation will be watching closely as new data emerges. Trends in gun sales, crime rates, and public safety will be scrutinized by policymakers, researchers, and the public alike. The results could influence future legislation and shape the national conversation for years to come. The debate is evolving, moving beyond the question of cost to challenge the very legitimacy and scope of firearms regulation itself. Lawmakers and activists on both sides are preparing for a prolonged battle over the future of gun policy in America. Ultimately, the repeal marks not the end, but the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter in America's ongoing gun debate, one that will test the nation's values, its laws, and its commitment to both safety and individual rights. The end of the NFA tax marks a turning point, closing one era of firearms regulation and opening another. The law, effective January 1, 2026, makes NFA items more affordable, but the rigorous registration process remains. Economic and societal effects will unfold over the coming years, with both risks and opportunities. This moment demands informed engagement, understanding the law, its history, and its real-world impact. Citizens are urged to read, research, and listen to differing perspectives. The future of firearms policy will be shaped by active, informed participation. Whether you see this as progress or peril, your voice matters. The conversation about guns in America is far from over. It's entering a new and critical phase.